As we heard in the previous segment, the Jewish Federations of North America, along with other diaspora organizations, issued public statements regarding the Israeli government's proposed judicial reforms, a rare intervention in what many see as an internal domestic issue. There were even protests against the reforms in such cities as New York, Washington, London, and Paris. This raises the bigger question that we will address in this week's Jewish Forum discussion: just how much of a say should the diaspora Jewish community have when it comes to Israel, and on what issues in particular? Joining us on the Jewish Forum is Dr. Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. and a former deputy Israeli minister and parliament member. He's in Tel Aviv. We have Joel Rubin, former U.S. deputy assistant secretary of state in Chevy Chase, Maryland. And with us also, Jonathan Tobin, editor-in-chief of JNS.org, speaking to us from Philadelphia. And Joel, I'm going to start with you. You've spoken out against your judicial reforms, but I don't want to talk about the substance of that, but should diaspora Jews have a say in that question?
Absolutely. And in fact, we've been kind of too silent for too long. I think that as a bonded community, the Jewish world looks to the state of Israel as the Jewish homeland, as well as the state of Israel for all of its citizens. And this means we have a stake in the outcome of what happens in Israel. Look, it's no secret. Israelis have been coming for decades to the United States. I have photographs on the wall of my parents' house of my grandparents meeting with Shimon Peres, who was fundraising for the state of Israel. This is nothing new. And now today, Israeli leaders continually come and speak to groups who then lobby Congress, ask for money for Israel. Those groups engage in domestic political campaigns, financing them. There's a highly interconnected political engagement. And American Jews, we're close friends of Israel. We believe in democracy. We have shared values. If we don't speak up for those and speak up strong, we are not helping Israel at all. And so, yes, we should be engaged, and we should be engaged much more aggressively over many more years than we have been up until very recently.
Jonathan Tobin, you heard Joel say U.S. Jews, diaspora Jews have a stake in Israel. They should be speaking up, including on this issue. What's your response?
Well, I think Jews have a right to speak up. The question is, should they have a say? Obviously, Israeli policy has to be decided by Israelis. There's a difference in, what kind of stake Americans have or don't have. Now, of course, Americans are always being asked to support things in Israel, of American friends of whatever. That's, the standard thing. But there are lines, and I think there are a couple of things that we should point out. Number one, when Americans express opinions about Israeli security issues or even, domestic political issues, they should do so with some humility. Too many Americans don't really know that much. American Jews don't really know that much about Israeli politics other than what they get from the New York Times. And a lot of that is just, it's just virtue signaling. And I think a lot of that right now about judicial reform is certainly that way. The line I would draw is when American Jews seek to use their clout, their political influence to undermine Israel, to try to save Israel from itself, to undermine and attack Israeli democracy and attack Israel's democratically elected government by using their influence with Washington and trying to undermine its policies. That's a line they shouldn't use. Speak up, sure. Everybody's entitled to opinion. Israel is important to everybody in the Jewish world. But when you try to play that game, and both the left and the right have done it, in turn over the years, that's not really legitimate.
All right. Well, Michael, you are both American-born and an Israeli. I want to get your response. And Jonathan's saying there should be a line drawn when it comes to domestic issues, security matters, in which American and other diaspora Jews should not perhaps cross.
Good to be with you, Kalev. It's not a matter of how much American Jews have the right to intervene or express themselves on Israeli domestic issues. The question is how they say it and exactly what they say. No one questions the fact that American Jews have a stake in Israel's stability, in Israel's security. As citizens of a democratic state, the common democratic values between the United States and Israel is one of the foundations of our historic alliance. So certainly there's an interest there. But for the Jewish organizations that have come to me and asked me whether they should be making statements, I say categorically no. One is people in the United States don't understand the issues here. They are immensely complex. It is not just about democratic reform or judicial reform. In this area of South Tel Aviv, it is much more about ethnicity, race, and class, about white privilege, if to put it in American terms. These issues are not understood widely in the American Jewish community. Secondly, the statements are used by elements and organizations that are not friendly to the state of Israel, and you're providing ammunition to those elements. And thirdly, they're kind of a boomerang, because in Israel, when liberal American Jews come out against the Israeli government, which is not liberal and tends to be very conservative and observant, it's used. Look who's coming against us. Yet more liberal upper-class Jews, mostly Ashkenazim. So the whole thing actually basically backfires. At the end of the day, I would also say that American Jews, as part of society which only last year experienced a major insurrection in its capital, where a former president now is facing multiple charges, I think American Jews should be a little bit humble about preaching democracy to any other country in the world.
All right, well, Joe Rubin, you have it. You should be a little more humble, show a little more humility. You're saying more aggressive, so maybe respond. And to the question of whether American Jews in the diaspora have enough of a grasp of political issues such as the judicial reforms.
Well, I love this discussion, and this is part of a vibrant democracy. And American Jews, we're at the vanguard of American democracy. And just to go to Ambassador's point, we're the ones, in many instances, leading the charge. And we should be vocal in defending American democracy. American Jews, by the way, 3/4 plus vote Democratic on a consistent basis. And it was the President Trump, the Republican leader, who basically tried to undermine that. American Jews, we have a stake in our survival here by having a strong democracy. And we weren't just invading an Israeli democracy in this recent discussion about judicial reform. We're watching the Israeli people. And the Israeli people, upwards close to 1 million in the streets, many of them asking for American intervention to help them against an autocratic leader in Prime Minister Netanyahu, who is trying to undermine Israeli democracy. So you bet we're going to speak up. And you bet that it's shared values. It's shared values on democracy in particular, and shared values on Judaism. And I think it's unfair to say that those protesting those judicial reforms are giving aid and comfort to the enemy. That means that all these IDF leaders who decided to protest are somehow supporting Hamas and those who hate the state of Israel. I just think that's beneath us in this discussion.
Jonathan Tobin, you could respond, but to the point of Joel, that there are Israelis calling on diaspora Jews to speak up, and you've spoken out somewhat strongly on that issue about those Israelis.
Listen, Israelis are always calling on Americans to sort of save, you pardon the metaphor, to save their political bacon. Israelis always want Americans to help them win battles that they haven't won before or can't win at home. That's kind of the nature of it. The hypocrisy is all over. American Jews, some of the people in the federations, talking about judicial reform, they're some of the same people who are against, an independent court, who are against, who want to restrict the independence or restrict the power or pack the court in the United States because they're not getting the decisions they want. They're some of the same people who think it's terrible to try to overturn the outcome of elections. Israel just had an election a few months ago, and these demonstrations, we can debate about them, but at its core, it's not so much about one proposal for judicial reform or another. It's about overturning. Joel just said it. This accusation that Netanyahu, who just won an election, whether you like it or not, whether you like him or not, he just won an election, and we have the same people who cry for democracy actually have no respect for democracy. They just want the outcomes of democracy to be in line with what they want. So the hypocrisy here, and it's true, it can cut both ways. Hypocrisy here is tremendous, especially when it comes to American Jews virtue signaling on this issue, many of whom really do not understand the issues that are involved. I think Michael stated very clearly there's a lot more here at stake in the people going out in the streets in Israel than just whether they don't like restricting the out of control power of the Supreme Court there.
Well, Michael, you could respond, but I do want to broaden it a bit. Are there issues? When should American Jews, diaspora Jews, speak up? When they should not just speak up, but have a say? There are certain issues regarding immigration, regarding religious observance in Israel. That are those issues where American Jews perhaps should have an actual say in what goes on in Israel?
Definitely. Before I have to respond to something I said earlier, I certainly never insinuated that the people demonstrating in the street are demonstrating and helping Hamas in any way. That's totally ludicrous to assert that. What I did say was that American Jewish organizations, in putting out statements, those statements are being used by anti-Israel, anti-Zionist elements in the United States, and that's just a fact. And therefore, you have to think very, very carefully about the statements you do put out. Yes, American Jews have a right to express opinions on issues certainly related to world Jewry. The Kotel issue, for example, which I was privileged to negotiate an egalitarian agreement on that Kotel. My own government withdrew from it, and I opposed that withdrawal. On issues affecting Jewish peoplehood, certainly. Israeli recognition or non-recognition of the reform and conservative movements, conversion issues, certainly. But what I said earlier is the American Jews have to think very carefully how they say things. If you make a statement, rather than coming out for one side or another, come out in support of Israeli democracy. Come out in support for Israel, which is going through a very difficult process here, maybe even a necessary process as part of our maturation. We're sort of in an adolescence now at 75 years old, and express it through love. And do not get involved in a partisan debate where you do not all know the facts, right. You do not know the languages. All right, imagine an Israeli Jew making far-reaching statements about the American constitutional process, someone who doesn't speak English. I want to
briefly, Jonathan, do you agree with Michael? There are some issues where Jews should have an actual say?
I think certainly the Kotel issues relating to Jewish identity, I think Israelis should listen to American Jews. But if you believe in democracy, if you believe Israel is an independent country, and I have strong opinions on those views, and they're not necessarily, certainly when it comes to the Kotel, that are aligned with this current government. But in the end, our position, my position throughout the years, whether Israel's doing something I like or don't like, if there is a majority in the Knesset, if the Israeli democracy has spoken and the Israelis want one thing, whether I like it or not, I think we have a right, we have an obligation to respect it. We do not have an obligation to save Israel from itself. Israeli democracy, the Israeli people, whether they're in the streets or at the ballot box, they deserve to make their own decisions about their own country.
Jonathan, I want to give Joel a chance to respond to that point.
One very important point is that, yes, there are 700,000 people out there.
If I may.
I'm sorry, I'll let Joel respond now.
And I truly respect my colleagues here. I want to say we are facing an existential crisis in the relationship between young American Jews and Israel. We need to find ways to build that connection up. I benefited from it. I've lived in Israel for more than a year of my life. My daughter had a bat mitzvah in Yerushalayim last summer. We saw our family there. I'm not ignorant of Israel, but I'm saying very clearly that American Jews, and especially if we want to engage young American Jews, to make sure they have a stake in the state of Israel, they have to have a stake in the state of Israel. And that's crucial. And that means listening. That means sharing common values. And that means saying, yes, humbly, we are, as our friends in the United, as you're our friends in the United States, and even our critics, we are going to listen to you respectfully. But a lot of the dialogue and a lot of what we see is now saying anti-U.S., anti-American Jewish, and that is in the wrong direction.
Okay, we'll have to end this here.